I'm Linda Piccini, and today my tip is how to troubleshoot your machine when it's not performing the way that you expect. Baby lock machines are so easy to use and thread and everything that when they're not living up to their reputation, you start to wonder, is it a problem with my machine? Chances are it's something you're doing, so sit down for this one. We're going to start with you're running your fabric through your machine and everything looks like it ought to be performing just perfectly. Has this ever happened to you? Why isn't it feeding? It's supposed to be feeding. And you're thinking, okay, I'm really happy I got through that. And then you start to look at your stitches and they kind of not look good. And then the back tells you something else. It's not good. Guess what? Your presser foot's not down. Let's do that. Simple solution. So always check to make sure that your presser foot is down when you start sewing. Now I'm working on the Baby Lock Victory, and this machine has jet air threading. Now there are some Baby Lock machines in our line that have safety features built in that won't allow you to stitch if the presser foot's up, but if you don't have one of those machines, this could likely be the culprit. Let's talk about another common issue. You change your stitch, you're stitching, you sew, and it doesn't look quite right. And in fact, you have to look kind of closely, but right here it shows that my needle threads are kind of pulling over here to the left, and my fabric looks like it's a little bit compressed. Well, what I did was I set my stitch selector onto the letter B, but I never took out my left needle. So the solution for this is if you change your stitch selector knob, make sure that your needles are in the appropriate position. Now my next little tell is if you stitch and it looks like your threads are closer together than you thought that they were going to be, and if it looks like the threads on the edge are really looping up, it could be that you accidentally knocked your differential feed down into a lower position. That will cause your fabric to feed in slower so that it kind of compresses the fabric, and it will also make a big difference on a regular stitch. So let's take a look at the solution. I'm going to do it on the opposite side. So see how this looks differently? My stitches are not as close together. I don't have that threads falling off the edge. And even more important is if you're on knit fabric and you have it down into a negative differential feed, those threads are really going to hang off the edge, and it'll do it just as well if you've got some thick decorative thread. So always check and make sure that your differential feed is in the neutral position when you don't have a need to delay the way that your machine thread feeds. Here's another example of something that may happen to you. You've set your machine up to do a 3-thread narrow. You stitch your machine and it looks like this. It's horrible. My threads are hanging off the edge. You might think, is my differential feed in the wrong place? No, it's in the right place. But the thing that I didn't do is I didn't change my stitch selector knob to coordinate with the physical changes that I made on the machine. So let's sew it now. Yeah, that's the stitch I was looking for. So again, cannot stress it enough. It's one thing to get your machine set up, but you have to change your stitch selector knob. You also want to make sure that when you change your stitch selector knob that you have all of your settings, all of your needles and everything in the right place. Now, if I take my machine and I want to do a narrow rolled hem, it's a super easy thing to just change your stitch selector knob, correct? And so I'll even change my cutting blade width. But that is definitely not the stitch I was looking for. Again, a simple situation of making sure that once you have this here, you have to change your stitch length setting so that it matches that narrow rolled hem, because what's happening here, when you change your stitch length knob, it's actually taking away your stitch finger. So now your machine can do that really fine stitch. Let's do it the right way. Okay, so there's a world of difference between these two stitches. So again, check those things out on your machine. Now, another common thing that happens is a stitch that looks like this. Yeah, I set it up for a 4-thread stitch, but I forgot to change my stitch length knob. So again, all these little settings, because the machine is so easy to use, it makes such a huge difference. Let's just cut this off. A world of difference between this and that. So it's the little things to pay attention to. Now, one other thing I will tell you is that if you are stitching on your machine, one of the things that people do all the time, and they really don't pay attention to it because they just don't understand, and that is this. Your needles on your serger, they're staggered. One is always lower than the other or higher than the other. And on our machines that have two different needle positions, whether it's the Triumph or the Past Ovation or even the Accolade, what you'll notice is that in the chain looper position, there are different stages of height for the needles. And they are that way because that's how the machine is timed. There's a looper that's angled. So because of that, your needles are angled to suit that. It's what allows you to perform a good stitch. But I have heard people say, it took me a while, but I finally got all my needles at the same height. That is not a recipe for success. I'm going to intentionally drop my needles just a skosh. Now, our machines also have a little window that will allow you to see if your needles are all the way up. So don't leave it to chance, thinking that, yeah, I think it's up all the way. Look at the little window, because if you don't, this is some of the stitching that could occur. So my machine was just stitching perfectly. Now what I've done is I've changed my needle height so they're not in all the way. It's a subtle difference, but this is what you're going to notice. I've got a skip stitch here. You'll see it even more so on the back of my fabric, right? So when you start seeing where it looks like little V's, the stitching is not perfect, chances are your needles are not all the way up in their highest position. So that's something to definitely check. I'm going to fix that now so I don't forget. Now, I'm not going to stitch this out, but I'm going to show you now that all Baby Lock machines have a built-in subsidiary looper for all of our machines that fall into this class. It's not our entry-level machine, but it's for the rest of them. Right here is a little device that what it does, I'm going to lift up my upper looper. What it does is it swings into place. And it allows you to stitch with just one looper thread because that closes up that hole. Now, if you don't remember that that was the last stitch that you had done and you've got that subsidiary looper in place, when you go to thread your machine again, it won't blow the thread out because it's actually got something in the way from that thread coming all the way through. So check to make sure if you're not doing a flat lock stitch that your subsidiary looper is not in place. My last tip has to do with actually threading the machine, and this happens most often on our machines that have jet air threading. Jet air threading is the ability for the machine to be able to blow through thread through this looper once your ports are engaged. And what will happen is most of the time, if you don't remember to move this indicator to go to the direction that you want that thread to go to, it's not going to blow in the right place. And so if you're threading your lower looper, it goes over to the right. And if you're threading your upper looper, you want that over to the left. It's the little things that matter, especially when it comes to your Baby Lock serger. Expect it to perform well. So the next time you're having any issues with your machine, start going through some of the little troubleshooting tips, and I'll bet you anything that will solve the problem for you. Thanks for joining me, and I will see you next time.